I'll never forget the first day I stepped into the old building that used to be a hospital. They said it was just a rumor, but I knew something was off about this place from the moment I entered. The walls were too thick, the air too heavy, as though it carried something ancient, something that didn't belong. It was my first year teaching at Blackwood High, a school tucked away in a small, quiet town, the kind of place where nothing ever happens until it does. At first glance, Blackwood seemed like any other high school, but when I walked the hallways alone, the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. It started with the whispers. I'd hear them low and unintelligible, like a breath just out of reach. Sometimes it sounded like a name, my name, being called from the shadows, but when I turned, nothing. I thought I was just tired. Maybe stress was getting to me. But as the days went by, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. One evening, after the last bell rang, I stayed behind to grade papers. The school was eerily quiet, save for the flickering lights above. The whispers returned, but this time they didn't fade when I looked around. They followed me, as if someone was right behind me, breathing down my neck. I turned quickly, but again no one was there. My heart raced. I was alone, or so I thought. I had just started to calm my nerves when the door to the old janitor's closet creaked open, though I was sure I had locked it before. The shadows inside seemed to move on their own. I stepped closer, drawn to the darkness like a moth to a flame. As I peered into the closet, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, hunched and twisted, stood in the corner. It was as if the darkness had taken shape and it was watching me. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were deep, hollow pits. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, as if I had no control over my own limbs. Leave. Now. A voice not my own whispered from the corner. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside in the parking lot, gasping for air. But as I looked back at the school, I saw something else. A face, pale and twisted, pressed against the top window, staring at me. My heart skipped a beat. There was no one inside, no one who could have been up there. But there it was. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. The next day I went back to the school, trying to convince myself that it had been a nightmare, a trick of the mind. But when I stepped into the classroom, the air was different, heavy. It felt like the walls were closing in. That afternoon, as I sat in my car in the parking lot, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. The janitor's closet light flickered on. I hadn't seen the janitor all day. I didn't know if I should go back in, but something inside me screamed to stay away. Later that evening, I discovered the truth. The building had a history, a dark one, a hospital that had been shut down decades ago after a fire. The patients? Many of them had died in those flames. But there was one patient, a girl, who had been trapped inside screaming for help. She was never found. Some said she was still there, in the halls, whispering, waiting. That night, the whispers returned. Only this time they weren't in the hallways. They were in my apartment, in my ear, just behind me. I could feel the cold breath on my neck. But when I turned, there was no one there. I don't teach at Blackwood anymore. I left after that night. But sometimes when the wind howls through the trees, I can still hear the whispers. I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, and I'll never forget the face in that window. It was supposed to be a simple after-school detention, just a handful of students and me, the unlucky teacher assigned to supervise. The group consisted of 4 troublemakers, sitting silently at their desks in the cold classroom. I didn't want to be there any more than they did, but rules were rules. We were in room 204, one of the older classrooms at Ridgewood High, located on the edge of what students referred to as the Forgotten Wing. The Forgotten Wing was a section of the school that had been sealed off for years. The story went that it was closed after a tragic incident decades ago, an accident that killed several students. No one knew the full story, but rumors spread like wildfire. They said you could still hear footsteps in the empty hallways, whispers, in the dead of night. Of course, I didn't believe in such things, at least not until that night. It was already dark outside when I heard the first noise, a faint scratching sound like fingernails running along the walls. I looked up from my desk, scanning the room. The students were all seated, their heads buried in their phones or notebooks, not making a sound. "Did anyone hear that?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the silent room. They all shook their heads, uninterested. I chalked it up to the old building and went back to grading papers. But then it happened again. This time it was louder, a slow, deliberate knock coming from the wall at the back of the room. My stomach tightened. That wall was adjacent to the Forgotten Wing. "All right, who's messing around?" I demanded, standing up and looking at the students. They looked genuinely confused, maybe even a little scared. "We didn't do anything," one of them said, their voice trembling. Hesitated, then decided to check it out. Armed with a flashlight from the teacher's desk, I opened the door and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The air felt colder out here, like the temperature had dropped several degrees. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward the sealed-off entrance to the Forgotten Wing. The metal door was rusted shut, covered in old warning signs, "Do not enter." But as I approached, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for someone or something to squeeze through. I turned back toward the classroom, intending to call for help, but the hallway seemed longer now, stretching into darkness. The faint sound of footsteps echoed behind me. "Hello!" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. Suddenly, the lights in the hallway flickered, then went out entirely, plunging me into darkness. My flashlight trembled in my hands as I turned it on, the narrow beam cutting through the black. That's when I saw it. A shadow, tall and distorted, standing at the far end of the hallway. It didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me, even though it had none. Panicking, I ran back toward the classroom, slamming the door shut behind me. The students looked up, startled. "We need to leave. Now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But before we could gather our things, the classroom door slowly creaked open behind me. No one was there. The lights in the room flickered, and the whispers began. Low at first, then growing louder, until they surrounded us, be the sea. Students huddled together, fear written all over their faces. One of them screamed, pointing to the window. A pale face was pressed against the glass, its mouth twisted in a silent scream. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We ran, tearing through the hallways until we burst out into the parking lot, gasping for air. When we turned back, the school was dark and silent as if nothing had happened, but I knew what I saw, and I knew I'd never step foot in Ridgewood High again. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to believe in ghost stories. I mean, they're just made-up tales to scare kids, right? But after what happened at my school, Ridgeview High, I don't think I'll ever sleep peacefully again. It all started on a Friday night. The school was hosting a fundraiser event in the gym, and I had volunteered to help set things up. By the time we were done, it was already past 9 p.m., and most of the staff had left. Only a few students and teachers were still hanging around, cleaning up. That's when my best friend Ethan came up with a brilliant, or should I say, stupid idea. "Hey, you want to check out the janitor's closet on the 3rd floor?" he asked, his eyes glinting with excitement. "Why?" I replied, immediately suspicious. "Come on, You've heard the stories, haven't you? People say it's haunted. That's where Mr. Calloway, the old janitor, disappeared 10 years ago. I rolled my eyes. Yeah, and they also say he's still there, sweeping floors or whatever. Give me a break. But Ethan was persistent, and before I knew it, we were sneaking up the staircase to the 3rd floor, which was completely dark and eerily silent. Most of the lights had been turned off for the night, and the only sound was the faint hum of the building's ancient ventilation system. The janitor's closet was at the end of the hall, a small, unassuming door with peeling paint and a tarnished metal handle. Ethan grinned as he pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. "Ready to meet Mr. Calloway," he joked, pushing the door open. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, smelling of mildew and something metallic, like rust. The closet was bigger than I expected, with shelves full of cleaning supplies and old broken equipment. Ethan was busy rummaging around, looking for God knows what, while I stood near the door, my gut telling me we shouldn't be there. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound, like something hard hitting the tile floor. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from further inside the closet, behind a row of shelves. "Ethan, stop messing around," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "What are you talking about? I didn't do anything," he replied, his head popping up from behind a shelf. The tapping continued, louder this time. My heart started pounding. "Let's just go, man. This isn't funny." Ethan hesitated, but finally nodded. As we turned to leave, the door slammed shut on its own. The sound echoed through the small space, and the faint beam of Ethan's flashlight flickered as if the battery was dying. "What the hell?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I grabbed the door handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," I said, panic rising in my chest. And then we heard it, a deep guttural sound like someone groaning in pain. It was coming from right behind us. Slowly we turned around, and in the dim light, I saw something that still haunts me. A figure was standing there, hunched over, with its back to us. Its clothes were tattered, soaked in dark stains, and its head hung at an unnatural angle. The groaning grew louder, and then it turned to face us. Its eyes, or where? Its eyes should have been, were hollow sockets, black as night. Its mouth was stretched into a horrifying grin, revealing jagged, yellowed teeth. "Run!" Ethan screamed, shoving me toward the door. We banged and kicked at it, screaming for help, but no one came. The figure started moving toward us, its steps slow but deliberate, each one accompanied by that same tap-tap-tap sound. In a moment of desperation, Ethan grabbed a mop handle and swung it at the thing. The handle passed right through it, like it wasn't even solid. The figure didn't react, just kept coming closer. Finally, the door burst open, and we stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air. But when we turned back, the closet was empty. No figure, no sound, just darkness. We never told anyone what we saw that night, but I don't think we needed to. Every time I pass that closet now, I swear I feel someone watching me. And sometimes, late at night, when the school is quiet, students say they can still hear the faint tapping of Mr. Calloway's broom on the tile floor.
If you enjoyed these real horror stories and want more chilling tales, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you the scariest stories from around the world. And if you've ever had a terrifying experience, share it in the comments. We'd love to hear it if you dare.